Prophet.tv, bringing you the news before it happens. Streamed live into your home via the worldwide internet. Welcome to Prophet.tv, bringing you the latest news from the spiritual front. The following program is being streamed live from Prophet.tv. Join us now for Prophet.tv. Join us now for Prophet.tv. Program already in progress.
Don had asked me to come and share with you just kind of an overall view of some of the things that we have been looking at over the last year and a half that are coming into place currently. And a little bit of my background, I went to seminary many years ago. I was in seminary from 1972 to 1975, and I had a little doctrinal issue with my denomination during the last semester that I was in seminary. And basically my candidates committee was telling me, it's fine, just go ahead and believe what you want to believe and just get ordained and whatever. Well, I went to an ordination examination for another person a couple of days later, in which this guy said that he did not necessarily believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And they ordained the guy anyway, and so I decided maybe I needed to take some time off from seminary and talk to the Lord a little bit about what's this all about and why did you bring me here in the first place. And during the next 3 months as I was talking to the Lord about this situation, He made it very clear to me that He had called me to ministry, but He had not called me to be a pastor. And in 1975, I had not a clue what that meant. And it took me 9 years to figure out what it meant. Meantime, I had to figure out how to feed my family, who was thinking that I was going to graduate one of these days and actually get a job. And so I ended up getting a job with the LA County Fire Department, and I put in a 24-year career with the LA County Fire Department. With holding every rank up to battalion chief, and spent my last 8 years in the fire department as a battalion chief, overseeing at one time 7 cities. And also the Lord had me, the last year I spent working with the Metropolitan Transit Authority as the regulatory official for the construction of the Red Line subway through Hollywood. And so I walked all of those tunnels under Hollywood and did all the inspections and all that sort of stuff. And the very last thing they had me doing was when the Hollywood and Highland station was originally designed, it was designed to be a plaza with some grass and some benches and all this sort of stuff. Well, we got word after I'd been in that office for about 6 months that their Triazicon had come in and they had done a proposal for building this Academy Awards theater on that site. And so then I got involved because now we're building a major building on top of this Metro Rail station, and there was a lot of interface issues between the exiting from the station and now this new building that's on the top. So I was working on this thing, not having a clue as to what that was all about until a couple of years ago. And then to find that what they built was the Babylon Court. And that's another whole tale, and I'm not going to go into that one tonight, but when I found out what it meant to have ministry or to be a minister without being a pastor wasn't until 1994. And in 1994, I had been encountering some issues in my life that I identified, 1984, did I say? 84. I was identifying some issues that I kind of identified as maybe being spiritual warfare, but I wasn't sure. I had never encountered anything like that before. And so I had been very close to a man by the name of Ed Savoso, who has the ministry Harvest Evangelism, and they have been the group that has they took Peter Wagner and they've taken numerous other people down to Argentina, to the Argentine revival, to get an anointing out of there in that, from that ministry, and from those who went down there and got that anointing came the Toronto outpouring and then the Brownsville outpouring. Both of those things were of people who had been to Argentina and been anointed by those pastors down there. But in 1984, the group I went down with one of the things we were doing was doing a training session for the elders and deacons of the churches of a man by the name of Omar Cabrera. And Omar Cabrera was a Protestant evangelist in Argentina, Argentina being a country that at that time was Catholic by constitution. And so he had undergone a bit of persecution during his ministry. There was times he had been thrown in prison for laying hands on and praying for healing, practicing medicine without a license, and all kinds of little issues like that. But in 1982, he had done some ministry in the city of Resistencia, and there was no Protestant ministries whatsoever in this city. And even many of the Catholic churches had no parish priests. And yet Spiritism and occultic healing was rampant throughout the city. And he had held a few evangelistic crusades there. It seemed maybe 100 people come out, maybe 1 or 2 receive Christ in the whole crusade. And that was different than some of the other cities that he encountered. So he began asking God, why is it that this city is so closed to the gospel? And he decided to rent a hotel room in the city and spend 5 days. Well, he didn't know how long it was going to be, but he decided he was going to pray and fast and ask God, why is this city so resistant? Resistencia, by the way, means resistant to the gospel. And during that 5 days, God showed him the principalities over that city and led him through a process of taking authority over those principalities. At the end of 5 days, he knew that that had been accomplished. And so he went out and rented a basketball stadium by faith, put up posters around town, held an evangelistic crusade. 5,000 people came the first night. 4,500 received Christ the first night. And he said, I think I'm on to something here. And so he then began coming back twice a week to pastor this church in a basketball stadium down there. And a church plant with 4,500 people, and yet still people were being added to the number day by day, Well, he began asking God, does this apply only to Resistencia, or perhaps this is a spiritual principle that might be in other cities also? So between 1982 and 1984, he went to 10 other cities, spent time praying and fasting in the city and asking God what the principalities were and taking authority over the principalities with equal results. So that by 1984, he now had churches in 11 cities, and we were holding the group that I was with was holding a training session for the elders and deacons of the 11 churches. There were 1,100 elders and deacons at that training session, all new Christians within 2 years, the previous 2 years. Altogether, during that 2-year period of time, they saw 138,000 people come to Christ. Well, that kind of opened my eyes. And what I began to understand during that 3 weeks that I was in Argentina in 1984 is that what it meant, or what my ministry was, what I was called to. And what I discovered that I was called to was the fact that this world is under a God of this world, or ruler of this age, and that we as pastors and as ministers cannot just have the mentality that we're trying to get everybody to come to Christ so that they can behave good and go to heaven. There's more to it than that. There's opposition. And there are people who are being held captives from that salvation. And so I began to realize that there was a process of being a Christian that involved spiritual warfare. It involved overcoming the God of this world, the ruler of this age, to be able to reach into the hearts of people. And I'll go into the verse that really has opened this up to me in recent years in a few minutes. But it transformed my whole worldview and my whole theology. Because now no longer was it my duty to go out and evangelize, but now I was going out on missions to rescue people out of the hands of the enemy and give them the opportunity of salvation. The verse I was going to refer to is Acts 26, verses 16 through 18. And this was Paul's defense before King Agrippa. And he is telling King Agrippa that Jesus appeared to him on the road to Damascus. And this is what he says Jesus said to him. Jesus said to him, "For this reason I have appeared to you." For this reason, this purpose, I have appeared to you. Okay, that's a good time to listen. When Jesus says, I've appeared to you for this purpose. He says, that you might be a witness and a testimony, both of the things that you have seen in me in the past, and of the things that you will see. So we have there the fact that Jesus isn't done yet. Jesus isn't here present with us any longer, other than by Spirit. But Jesus says to Paul, I'm calling you, my purpose in calling you is to be a witness and a testimony, both of the things that you've seen in me and of the things that you will see in me. And this harkens back to Jesus' own words in the book of John, where he says, I only do what I see the Father doing. I only speak what I hear the Father command to speak. And then he says, there are many things I have yet to teach you, but you're not ready for them yet. But when the Comforter comes, he will take what is of mine and he will deliver it to you. He will reveal to you the things that are of mine. And Jesus says, I and the Father are one. What I receive from the Father is mine, and I glorify the Father by what is in me, and the Holy Spirit will reveal those things to you. And so we're in this process where Jesus isn't done with us yet. He's showed us things from what we have learned from the things that he's done in the past, and I talk about this as being strong in the Lord. We have the Word of God, we have teaching that teaches us about who God is, teaches us about his attributes, it teaches us his word. We see examples of how he's dealt with men. We are to be strong in the Lord, but it also says that we're to be strong in the strength of his might. Well, how are we strong in the strength of might? It's when the Holy Spirit delivers to us those things that are of his, and we are functioning in his strength to do those things. So this was my start. This gave me my perspective on ministry, and it really transformed my life. I mean, I came back from that trip in Argentina in 1984, and my wife hardly knew me. I mean, I was a totally transformed person. Now I began to understand what my calling and my ministry was all about. Now, I was still in the fire department until just 3 years ago. And I had actually an official position of ministry in the fire department for a brief time, but I had less opportunity to minister in that official position than I did in all the times that I was just around people. Both people that we went out to help in the service of the fire department and people around the station. Well, in 1994, I began working with Harvest Evangelism regularly, and I actually became their television and video producer since 1994 up until last year. And then I retired from the fire department in the year 2000. Well, 3 years ago, January, the Lord told me that I was to leave the church that I had been in for 25 years and go to this church. He said, you're supposed to be over here right now. Well, that was quite a change also. It was quite a shock to my family. It was quite a shock to a lot of people around me. But God said, you're supposed to be over here now. Okay, Lord, I don't know fully why yet. In that first year that I was over here, I just received. I was receiving worship and prayer, and God was ministering to my spirit. And I was becoming strong in my spirit in a church that was capable of equipping me in that way, more so than the one I had been in for 25 years. The one I'd been in for 25 years, I was very strong in the Lord. I knew the Word very well. I'd gotten a lot of good teaching. I had taught a lot of people. I was an elder in that church. But now, as he told me I'm to be over here, I began learning the things of the Spirit in greater depth Now, I'd been to Argentina 14 times, and I'd received anointings and various other things from Argentina, but now I was in a place where, in looking at the previous 7 years of my life, God says, you've been pulling more and more back from ministry. Even though I was doing video stuff, I was doing technical stuff, and I was pulling more and more back from ministry. And God says, and you see the result of that is that your family is getting hit and targeted more and more because you're not doing what I created you to do, what I called you to do. And so 2 years ago, January, the Lord said very distinctly to me, He said, you've been pulling out of ministry for 7 years, and you see that your family's still getting hit. Now it's time you start doing some damage to the enemy's camp. And I had no clue what was going to happen the very next day. Because the next day I had been involved in an early morning prayer meeting at that church, and they had decided that right after the first of the year they were going to do 40 days of prayer walking through the city. And so I came to that session that morning, and the Lord spoke to me and said the place that I was to go to prayer walk that morning is that I were to go to the gates of the city and worship in the gates and anoint the gates. I said, okay, Lord, where are the gates of the city? And He gave me 4 locations. 4 locations came to mind immediately, and so I went out faithfully and obediently, and I just anointed those areas and began dancing and singing and worshiping in the gates at 6 o'clock in the morning. And, putting on a show for those driving on the freeway, which was the thing. So I come back to the prayer meeting the next morning, and so I had no clue what was going to come out of that. But I go back to the prayer meeting next morning, and 3 intercessors come up to me and they say, Don, if you draw lines between those 4 gates, now I hadn't even told them I'd gone to 4 gates the day before. They said, if you draw lines between those 4 gates that you went to yesterday, where do the lines intersect? And I said, I don't know. There's a map on the wall. Let's go do it. So we drew the lines on the map, and they intersected in the middle of the Colorado Street Bridge in Pasadena, which is where I primarily am located. And they said, well, we want to go back out with you to the 4 gates, and then we want to go down to the Colorado Street Bridge and see what's going on there spiritually. Because the Colorado Street Bridge is known as the Suicide Bridge. Okay? So we go out to the first gate, and we're wandering around, and they're asking questions about different things, and we're looking at graffiti, and we're doing this different stuff, and we're anointing stuff and everything. All of a sudden, one of them says, well, where actually is the city line? And I said, well, you see that white line on the curb over there? That's the city line. They said, well, can we go look at it? I don't know why intercessors ask these questions. I said, sure, I mean, we're all adults. Well, yeah, but we can go over there. So we go across the street, and as we're walking up to this line, I look at it and I said, oh my gosh, because right next to the marking of the city line was a demonic watcher symbol. A symbol that is placed, as a curse is placed, an assignment of a demon that stands over the area and keeps watch over it. And so I had done some study on that about 10 years prior, but I hadn't really paid much attention to them in recent years. And so I said, well, that's interesting. Here we got the city line at the city gate, and here's this demonic watcher symbol right next to the city line. But there was something unique about this one, and that's another whole story, so I'm not going to go into that story tonight. But that was the beginning of what has happened over the last 2 years that has been an absolute download of revelation from God and an empowering to go out and to begin to pull down the principalities in various locations. And the revelation has just increased and increased day by day from that. But the thing I want to get into tonight talking about is the current situation that we're facing here in Southern California, but it's actually a worldwide situation. And this has to do with Tibetan Buddhism. Currently, right now, and at the LA County Museum, there is an exhibition, and this exhibition consists of several hundred idols, Tibetan idols, but it also consists of a sand mandala. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with perhaps Hopi or Navajo sand paintings where they create designs in the sand. Well, this is very similar to what the Tibetan Buddhists do. They come out and they have the lamas in great detail create the sand painting. And the one at the LA County Museum is about 10 foot in diameter, and it's very intricate, very detailed, and there's a whole lot of objects in this thing. Well, I had heard about a year and a half ago that there was something that was going to be coming to the LA County Museum that had to do with Tibetan Buddhism, and there was some bad stuff dealing with it. But I knew nothing at that time about Tibetan Buddhism or what this was all about. I just knew that various people were telling me this is not a good thing. And not only that, but the county put in a considerable chunk of money to bring this whole thing in. So we began doing research, and concurrently, God was giving to the team that I was involved in a number of assignments all over LA County that had to do with reconciliation and dealing with root iniquities and acts that had been done against the Native Americans of this area and that sort of thing. So we began looking at various stuff. As we began looking into the Native Americans of this area, the peoples who inhabited the central part of Los Angeles County were called the Tonga Indians. Later they were given the name the Gabrielinos because they became the mission Indians of the San Gabriel Mission. Well, the Tonga peoples, according to their lore, may have arrived on location in California as early as 6,000 years ago. I don't know that I accept that date, but that's what their claim is, and they have some legends that possibly could lead to that. But the important thing is that they were the wealthiest people among the Southern California Indian tribes, and they established the trading system among the Southern California Indian tribes. And last July, we actually did an initiative in a ceremony down here on the boardwalk area in Santa Monica, or the Ocean Park area at the end of Ocean Park Avenue, because as I began examining the history of this area, ever since the Ocean Park and Venice area began to be established in 1890s and the early part of the 19th century, there was a tremendous amount of greed and competition and drawing for entertainment among the people. And I was searching for clues about why was that so, because the other thing that happened down here is that it was on a pier that used to be down at the end of Pier Avenue, down where the two condominium towers are now. On that pier, in the 1960s, there was a man operating at Pacific Ocean Park there as a carnival operator by the name of Anton LaVey. And Anton LaVey, during the time he was living here in Ocean Park and Santa Monica area, wrote the Satanic Bible, and he began his whole thing that then moved to San Francisco. Then I ran into a couple of intercessors who had grown up on the East Coast, but they were brought by their families to the area of Ocean Park every summer where they were satanically ritually abused. So I said, something is going on here. Why is this core of evil sitting here in Santa Monica? Why has this come out of here? Anton LaVey, by the way, starred also in the movie Rosemary's Baby, which was the first satanic movie that was released to general release to the public in 1966, I believe it was, with Mia Farrow, and I don't remember who the other actors were. So, in trying to understand how did this evil get established, I ran across these two sentences that talked about the Tonga Indians in the establishment of this whole thing. They said that in ancient times, the Tonga Indians who inhabited this area used to come to the area that we now call Ocean Park in Venice, and they collected shells from that area that were used as money in the trade and the commerce among the Indian tribes of Southern California. And so that went along fine for a few years until the inland Indians began developing glass beads, and they came into competition with the Tongvas. And we started getting some combatant issues, and we started getting some competition issues and greed issues, and those were the root issues or root iniquities over this land. And so we watched the development from about 1905 until 1925. At one time, there were 8 piers built along this stretch of beach. There were 14 full-size roller coasters on these 8 piers. And you had amusement parks and ballrooms and restaurants and all this stuff. When Abbot Kinney opened up Venice, what he called Venice America at that time, they built a pier out at about the area where the pavilion is now. And on that pier, the day they opened, which was July 4th of 1905, they had 40,000 people show up. He had built a special rail line from Los Angeles because of the competition with Santa Monica. Santa Monica would not allow him to extend the line down to Venice. So he brought another line in through Downey and into the Venice area. So competition was there. We saw that piers were burned down. That's what happened to this pier at the end of Pier Avenue in 1924. The pier was burned down right after the owner of the pier had put $100,000 of investment in it to improve it. The group immediately came along and gave him $200,000 for the pier, for the rights to the pier, and took the burden off of him, and then they put in a permit to build a new steel and concrete pier. Well, the city of Santa Monica said, well, you don't understand. We own 40 feet of the sand from the water. And in order for you to build a pier, you have to go over our property, and we're not going to let you do that. So they put it out for lease. They would lease the property. And in 1924, this corporation was paying $2,000 a month to lease that 40 foot of seafront property in order to build their pier over it. Well, that pier fell into somewhat disrepair during the World War II. In 1951, the owners of the pier thought, well, we need to revitalize this, and at that time, the Aragon Ballroom sat out there. And they brought in Lawrence Welk, which became the most popular show on television from 1951 to 1956. And even the Dodge Motor Company took over sponsorship of that, and it became the most popular show on television in the early 50s. But then in 1956, the LA Turf Club, which is Santa Anita Racetrack in Arcadia, and CBS Television bought the pier and began building Pacific Ocean Park to come into competition with Disneyland. And it was in that Pacific Ocean Park that Anton LaVey was a carnival operator. Well, in looking back at this competition, and looking back that we had amusement parks and amusement zones here for quite a long time, I believe that what happened is at the turn of the century, the people who ran carnivals and operated those types of concessions were mostly gypsies. And I believe that they brought a large influx of population into the area to operate all of these things. And so you had a gypsy influx, and now you brought all the spiritual issues with them to this territory. Now let's shift a little bit. The Tongvas are also responsible for another root iniquity in the county. In sometime around 700 AD, they had a being appear to them that they described as an ethereal being, but a rational man as opposed to being an animal, who appears to them and tells them, I am your captain or your lord. And he became their lawgiver and the teacher of their shamans. And they developed a whole religious system around this being that was called the Chinichinich religion. This became the first missionary religion among native peoples of the entire United States. And it spread all throughout Southern California and down into Mexico and all the way up through the Owens Valley, mostly among the Paiute and Shoshonean-speaking native peoples. This being that appeared to them appeared in 3 different phases or 3 different appearances. And one of those appearances was called Tobit. Now, archaeologists in recent days have done some examination of the ritual grounds on which the Tonga Indians operated. And they have said that the ritual practice of the Tonga Indians was so similar to Tibetan Buddhism that they believe that Tibetan Buddhists must have landed in this land prior to the Spaniards showing up in 1542. And yet they do not have any historical documentation to indicate that that happened. Now, one might question, if the Indians themselves are saying that this being was an ethereal being, they didn't say he was solid form or anything, then this was some type of spiritual entity. Several other players in recent years, in the last 150 years, that have affected the culture of the world were, first of all, Helen Blavatsky, who lived in Germany and began her writings in about 1875. She is considered the founder and the primary teacher of the Theosophical Society. The Theosophical Society over the last 100 years has been called New Age Buddhism. Helen Blavatsky got most of her information and had many of her writings dictated to her by what she described as an ascended Tibetan master, some type of a being that appeared to her and dictated to her many of her writings. Another key player in the spiritual realm over the last 100 years was a man by the name of Aleister Crowley. Aleister Crowley in 1903 had just become married. He and his wife went to Cairo, Egypt. They were in the Egyptian Museum in Cairo, and a being manifests to them who then dictates to him a series of writings which became the basis for a form of witchcraft called magic. And that is the predominant form of dark witchcraft in the world today. It is the predominant form of witchcraft that Jack Parsons and L. Ron Hubbard got involved in 1946 in Pasadena, attempting to evoke the spirit of Babylon into physical manifestation. Aleister Crowley, the spiritual entity that appeared to him, identified itself as an ascended Tibetan master. Another woman, Alice Bailey. She was part of the Theosophical Society. Her soon-to-become husband, Forrest, was the U.S. General Secretary of the Theosophical Society, headquartered at that time in Point Loma, California. And he left the Theosophical Society in 1920 to form his own organization, and Alice, this young woman, went with him. And together they established what they called at that time in New York City the Lucifer Trust, a publishing house. Since then, they've changed the name because I guess they thought that was a little too obvious. And it's now called the Lucius Trust, as it has been for a number of years. And the Lucius Trust has offices on Wall Street in New York, and they are a primary publishing house for the United Nations. Now, Alice had an encounter with a spiritual being in the 1920s that identified itself as an ascended Tibetan master. And this ascended Tibetan master dictated to her 24 volumes of writings, which are still available today and are pushed and sold by the Lucius Trust. And her writings form the basis for an organization, a daughter organization of the Lucius Trust called World Goodwill. World Goodwill is very close in with the United Nations. Basically, their purpose is to promote peace among men of peace around the world. Sounds fine, doesn't it? Peaceful. Sounds peaceful, yeah. However, they are also the focal point for the formation of a one-world religion. And that one-world religion is based on the doctrines and teachings of Tibetan Buddhism as expounded upon by Alice Bailey in the writings dictated to her by an ethereal being, an ascended Tibetan master. Well, let's go back to Tibet. I began theorizing that if we don't have any historical evidence that Tibetans came to this land, linguistically different is the word Tobit from Tibet. And if the archaeologists are saying that the ritual practice of the Tonga Indians was very similar to Tibetan Buddhism, then perhaps this could be the same spirit that is behind Tibetan Buddhism, and is behind Theosophical, and is behind Aleister Crowley, and is behind Alice Bailey, all dealing with ascended Tibetan spirits. In fact, we've got a few others. We've got another character here in the Los Angeles area by the name of John Roger, who he took on the role of the ascended Tibetan traveler, master traveler, and he had a thing that people call the traveler cult, and there's some other names to it. But he spent time here in Santa Monica also. He was at Eknar here in Santa Monica. He was very involved with Self-Realization Fellowship down in the Sunset Canyon. And this guy was a school teacher at Rosemead High School until in 1964 he had a serious traffic accident on Hollywood Boulevard and was hospitalized for about 6 months. Toward the end of that 6 months, he had some additional problems and ended up having to have surgery for kidney problems. And he went into a coma during that surgery. While he was in the coma, his mother appears to him and calls him John Roger. Well, his name had been Roger, and so now his mother is calling him John Roger. Well, he comes out of this and starts consulting with all these spiritual people when he comes out of the coma, and they tell him this is his inner self, and that this John is John the Baptist. But in fact, he identifies this as the ascended traveler master of Tibet. So we have all of these Tibetan connections. Well, we learned about 1.5 years ago that this exhibit was coming to Los Angeles. And then about April of last year, we started getting more and more information. And we found not only was the exhibit coming to the LA County Museum, but there was already an exhibit at the LA County Museum that was dealing specifically with Tibetan Buddhism and the patron deity of Tibetan Buddhism, Avalokitesvara. And at the Norton Simon Museum in Pasadena, the whole bottom floor is filled with Tibetan and Hindu idols. In the Pasadena Pacific Asian Museum, we learned that an exhibit called the White Burl Sutra was coming, and the White Burl Sutra is an oracle. The oracle is a lama who allows himself to be possessed by a very powerful demon and then proclaims a demonic prophecy. And it is the oracle who is the advisor and the counselor to the Dalai Lama. And so this prophecy was going to be coming to the Pasadena Pacific Asian Museum, which is a prophecy about what would happen in later days. And it says, when the iron bird comes to the land of the red man, then these things will come about, is part of the words of this prophecy. And so when planes begin to fly in the land of the red man, of the Indian, then this prophecy would begin to come into fulfillment. Let's go into some history of Tibetan Buddhism. In about 735 AD, Tibet was ruled by a Chinese king. His wife was a Buddhist, and she petitioned the king that she might have Buddhist lamas to minister to her religion. And so they brought a sect of Buddhists in from India, but this sect of Buddhists was not content with ministering to the king's wife. They wanted to take over the religious practice and the political control of the entire country. They were rejected and rebuffed at first, and so they went about ritually defiling the country and then creating a ritual to invoke demonic principalities into the land in order to gain spiritual control over the land. And in 745 AD, they overthrew the Chinese government and they established the office of the Dalai Lama as God and King of Tibet. Today we have the 14th of that succession of Dalai Lamas. And so the current Dalai Lama, or he's also called the Kundun, is the 14th in a succession of demonically inspired and demonically filled gods and kings in this realm of this world. In 1951, actually from 1951 to 1958, the Chinese began coming back into Tibet, and they began destroying temples, and they began killing lamas and all this sort of thing. In 1958, the oracle, the Nanchang oracle, who is the direct giver of word to the Dalai Lama, channels a particular demon who is identified as Pehar, and this Pehar demon was the demon behind the Red Mongols, is what they state in their teachings. So this oracle tells the Dalai Lama to escape from Tibet. He sets up a government and religious practice and system control over Tibet and the rest of the world from Dar es Salaam, India. Now let's move up to 7 years ago. 7 years ago, the Tibetan Buddhists began a project called the Peace Vase Project. And in this Peace Vase Project, they had constructed 10,000 of these vases. And in the vases, according to the internet, are placed these dried balls of material. And the dried balls, according to the internet, are made up of crushed precious stones mixed with seawater into a paste and then rolled into balls and dried and put in this. However, the Buddhist material indicates that there's a lot more to that it's not just precious jewels and seawater, but there are a series of bodily fluids that are also mixed in with this as part of the ritual. And overall, it becomes a defiling substance, and the purpose of the defiling substance is now supposedly, according to the internet, to bring peace and healing to the land and to the waters. And so these 10,000 vases have been taken all over the world, and they have been buried in governmental cities. They've been buried on colleges and university campuses. They've been put into major bodies of water and major rivers all over the world. There's somewhere, we understand, about 3,000 of these in the United States alone.
Well, I'm sorry, we got a little bit distracted here. You were saying there was also like weird bodily fluids and things?
Yeah, part of the ritual uses... I think they identify 4 body fluids that come out of it. It's menstrual blood and semen and caca and everything. Yeah, some junk.
Weird, wacky.
Yeah, and this is part of their ritual, and so they bury these vases all over. Now the Dalai Lama, each Dalai Lama has a particular tantra that is his signature ritual system. And Tantra basically means ritual system. This particular Dalai Lama takes as his idol or his guide the 5th Dalai Lama, who was a very evil man, very warlike man. And he has developed what is called the Kalachakra Tantra. The Kalachakra Tantra calls upon the god Kalachakra, who is the time god. The purpose of these rituals is to make alterations in ages and time. The Kalachakra Tantra consists of the Kalachakra initiation, which was done here in Santa Monica, at the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium in 1988 or 89. It was done in Pasadena in 1996. It's been done in many, many places around the world, which basically, in reading the description of what the initiates go through, is the initiates basically give up all their own will, all their own spirit, everything that is part of them, and they give that over to the master leader of this initiation, and basically what they receive back is demonization. So the Kalachakra initiation is part of this tantric system, and then the Kalachakra sand mandala has been done all over the world following up on these peace vases. So every place where they've buried the peace vases, they have gone and done these Kalachakra sand mandalas. When they construct the mandala, what they're constructing in this sand painting is a habitation, a palace of deities. And so they construct it with 4 gates, and there's various symbols all around this that represent the various deities that will be invoked into this sand mandala. The sand mandala serving as a symbolic representation of a spiritual habitation or a spiritual palace. When they complete construction of the sand mandala, they do this ritual in which they invoke these spirits into this sand palace or the symbolic palace or habitation. For the Kalachakra sand mandala, they invoke 722 principalities into that. Very specifically, the purpose of the Kalachakra sand mandala is to make alterations in the age. When we talk about the age of Aquarius or some of these other terms that people have used over the years, this is what the purpose of the sand mandala is. It is to make changes in what is going on in the control of the spiritual realm. Okay? And to take spiritual authority over the territory by invoking these principalities into the area. The Kalachakra sand mandala has been done all over the world. We were told in last April that that was the mandala that was going to be done here at the LA County Museum. We found out in August that they had changed, and they now were going to be doing what is called the Chocolatevara Mandala. The Chocolatevara Mandala has never been done in the United States before. It is the most complex mandala that is ever constructed in the world. Its express purpose is to invoke a world ruler. The first time it's been done in the United States, it's done here in Los Angeles. Why here in Los Angeles? Well, I believe it has something to do with the stronghold established through the native peoples of this land who were on the land, who had a ritual practice very similar to Tibetan Buddhism. That's why the Dalai Lama came here in the 80s. That's why he came to various places in Los Angeles County continually. Now, there's other openings and different kinds of things in other cities around the world, but this was the first city that he came into, and this is the first place that they held the Kalachakra initiation in the United States. And in Los Angeles is the first place that this mandala has ever been built. Now, this mandala, since the purpose is to invoke a world ruler, it is also called the law mandala, because when you create a world rule, you change the law. You're changing the law structure of the world. In Daniel chapter 7, verses 24 and 25, it talks about a horn that will be raised up, who will wear down the saints, and he will intend to make alterations of time and law. And he will overcome the saints. A few verses up from there, and this whole chapter of Daniel, chapter 7 of Daniel, it telescopes. There's little pieces of information here, then there's an expansion of the information. Then you look at another chunk, and there's another expansion of the information. In verse 21 and 22, again talks about this horn that will be raised up, who will wage war against the saints and will overpower them, until the Ancient of Days comes and passes judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High. Now that's the first part of verse 22. The second half of verse 22 is very, very significant to us, because it tells when the Ancient of Days will come and pass judgment in favor of the saints of the Most High. And here's what it says. And this will be when the saints take possession of the kingdom.
Do it again. That's
okay?
Good.
So, Daniel chapter 7, verse 21, this horn will raise up, he will wage war against the saints, and he'll overpower them, until verse 22, the Ancient of Days comes and passes judgment in favor of the saints of the Highest One, and this will be when the saints take possession of the kingdom. Now, Jesus went about healing every sickness and disease. He went about delivering all those oppressed of demons and proclaiming to them the gospel of the kingdom. You'll find over and over that when Jesus was moving around, what was he proclaiming? He was proclaiming the gospel of the kingdom. In the verse we talked about earlier where Paul says that Jesus said, I'm protecting you from the Jews and the Gentiles to whom I am sending you in order to open their eyes to bring them out of darkness into light, out of the dominion, the kingdom, the rule, the reign, the authority of Satan, to the dominion, the kingdom, the rule, the reign, the authority of God, so that when you're in the kingdom of God now, there is repentance for sin. And there is an inheritance among those who are being sanctified by faith in Jesus Christ. So we have a world that is under a God of this age, a ruler of this age. Jesus even makes a statement. He says, the ruler of this world is coming, but he has nothing in me. What did he have? There was no unrighteousness in Jesus. Okay? So we have what is going on through this oracle, this prophecy that is being proclaimed in Pasadena, through the meditation and the training and everything, and bringing in the motion picture industry people and the business people of Los Angeles into this exhibit, and in the invoking of these demonic principalities into this mandala. Now down in Orange County at the Bowers Museum, we have another whole exhibit that they brought the ritual objects from the palace of Lhasa in Tibet, which is this major palace of the Dalai Lama, in which there are 50,000 meditation rooms. 50,000 cell meditation rooms. Okay? Now think of it this way.
Little tiny room.
Very tiny rooms. But when all you're doing is channeling demons, you don't need a lot of space. The Tibetan Buddhism came about in 745 AD, and Tibet, which is called the roof of the world, the highest nation in the world, has been in relatively isolated state since 740, well, even before then, but since 745 AD, until within the last 40 to 50 years, people have started to move more and more into the area of Tibet, and the Chinese are coming back in and everything. So for approximately 1,300 years, you've got these monks in isolation interacting with the demonic realm, and they have developed a very high degree of what I call spiritual technology in the manipulation of the demonic realm. Now, this is people will say, well, who's manipulating who? Well, it is a mutual thing because it's a symbiotic relationship. The demonic realm does not have authority in this world. Authority was given to man over this world. And when Jesus came, authority was given to Jesus. So the demonic realm does not have the ability to function in this world. Now, the demonic realm is 1/3 of the angelic realm. Okay? So we're talking about the same kinds of beings that are in the angelic realm, but we are told in Revelation 12 that 1/3 of the angels and Satan himself was cast down to the earth. So since they do not have any authority to function in this world, how do they function? They have to usurp the authority of man or gain the worship of man in order to exercise authority, to exercise power in this realm. We need to put a new one in there.
Yeah, hold on a second. To not let the customer.
Okay, so we're talking about a about a high degree of spiritual technology among the Tibetan Buddhists in the manipulation of the demonic, and that this is a symbiotic relationship, because the demonic realm needs the authority of man in order to function in this world, or to create anything in this world. Man needs the power of the demonic in order to gain and grow in his authority in this world, if he is not coming under the authority of God. And so there's a symbiotic relationship where it's you scratch my back and I'll scratch yours. And so they have learned how, in that sense, to control and manipulate the demonic realm. This is evident in that now no longer are they operating at the level of defiling one land and coming in and taking spiritual authority of that land by invoking the demons in, but now they are in the process of trying to do this over the whole world. Okay? Let's go back to see if we can understand a little bit about Tobit again, and about how and why Tibet. Last spring, an intercessor came up to me and said, Don, I've got a name of a demon that I've heard once, but the Lord told me I'm supposed to tell you now because you need to know about this demon. Well, that's not necessarily what I want to know about. So anyway, she gave me the name of this demon, and she said, I understand that there's something in the Apocrypha about this demon. So I did some research in the Apocrypha, and sure enough, this demon appears in 2 books of the Apocrypha. The Book of Tobias, which is about a young man, Tobias, whose father's name is Tobit. Okay? And it also appears in the Book of the Wisdom of Solomon. Now I'm just going to do a real quick, brief recap of what these 2 books are about. In the Book of Tobias, Tobias is a young man, and he's sent out by his father to go seek a bride. As he begins in his journey, another man joins him, which as we get further down in the story, we learn is an angel by the name of Raphael. This angel, Raphael, has him stop by a stream one night and catch a fish, and tells him to take the fish with them as they go on in this journey. They're going to seek a woman by the name of Sarah. Sarah is in utter despair because she's been married 7 times, but she's still a virgin. And she's still a virgin because she has killed her 7 husbands on the wedding night by strangling them.
What a guy.
And they didn't even have Prozac in those days. I mean, but as we learn through the story, the reason she has strangled these husbands is that she's under the covering or the spell of this demon Asmodeus. And Asmodeus is the one who leads her to do this. As Tobias and Raphael arrive on scene, Raphael instructs Tobias to create an incense with a portion of this fish, and that drives off this demon Asmodeus, which then Raphael bans to the land of Egypt. And so this demon flies off to the land of Egypt. Now, isn't that interesting that Egypt, being the primary source of many of the things in Freemasonry, many of the things in the occult, many of the things in the satanic ritual, all come out of the religious system that began in Babylon, the original Babylon, in Iraq, by the way, shifted into Egypt when the nations were scattered from the Tower of Babel, and that spiritual system that came out of Egypt has come down through the ages and is present in many, many of the occultic rites. Okay, well, they capture the bride, or they take the bride, and she has no problem now, and she and Tobias are married. They go back to the father, Tobit, and Tobit is blind, but the angel now has Tobias take the gall from the fish and put it on his eyes, and his eyes are healed. Well, that's really interesting because the Tonga Indians' creation legends talk about the world being inhabited by fishes. And yet the fishes were out of water and there was not much water, and the water did not taste good. Until this one fish comes in and brings what they called the Tosset stone. And the Tosset stone is broken open and is filled with gall, and gall is poured into the waters and gives taste to the waters. And now the fish return to the waters. They made the waters bitter, and the fish now like the taste of the waters. This is interesting because Dagon, we have our story about the Ark of the Covenant that was captured by the Philistines and taken into the temple of Dagon. Dagon was the fish god, the father of Baal. And so we have this tie-in that you have gall in both of these stories. And I personally believe that the story of Tobias is a parable of the nation of Israel because of the 7 husbands, and there were 7 nations that came against Israel and that are spoken of in the book of Judges. And so I believe that there's something in that story that is a parable of the nation of Israel. And it may be that this Tobit and the fish and the gall and all the rest of the stuff that's in this element are some of these early encounters with the demonic realm that people begin to talk about, and we see carried down by legends, and we still see present in certain things. Second story is the wisdom of Solomon. In the wisdom of Solomon, supposedly this demon was invoked by Solomon for the purpose of helping to construct the temple. Why? Because this demon has a specific ability to cut stone like a laser. He's able to cut sharp edges on stone. Don't ask me how, whatever, but anyway. So supposedly wisdom invokes this demon, but he keeps them in a dungeon under lock and key because he's afraid of letting him get out of control. So the story goes that Solomon is boasting about all of his wisdom and all of his power and all this stuff before Asmodeus one day. And Asmodeus says, well, if you're so powerful and you're so wise and everything, why are you afraid of me? Why are you keeping me locked in this dungeon? And he taunts the king to the point where the king opens the door.
Kind of pride, isn't it?
It's pride. And so what happens? This demon with one wing bats Solomon. He flies into another land, according to this tale, and he arrives in that other land in the clothes of a pauper and goes through this whole thing. Now, there's a fish in this story, too, because Solomon gets a job as an assistant cook at the king's residence in Assyria. The king calls for a special meal, and now Solomon, because he once was a king, knows what a king likes, and so he prepares this very special meal, but he also falls in love with the king's daughter. Well, the king's not too happy with having his chief cook marrying his daughter, and so he finally relents, allows them to marry, but you must leave the country. And so they go out, and they're off on the coastlands. They buy a fish one day, and in this fish is the ring that supposedly gives Solomon the power. He immediately transforms back into his kingly garbs, and they go back off to Israel, and they confront Asmodeus, who has been masquerading on the throne as the king for this period of 3 years. And when they confront Asmodeus, it says in this story that he flies off to the highest mountain where he ever rests. He flies off to the highest mountain where he ever rests. Mount Everest. Okay?
Well, it ties in with, the enemy is perpetually seeking to climb the Mount of God.
Right.
Which is obviously in the spirit the highest place
Yeah.
where God has his throne.
Yeah.
So that's why they had high places in Israel. He's
Right.
going to find the highest place on earth.
Yeah, so he goes off to this highest place, which is right next to the highest nation in the world, Tibet. The name Asmodeus means in Persian, bringer of wrath or bringer of anger. And this story appears also in the Talmud. It also appears in the book, The Keys of Solomon, which is an occultic writing that was associated with the Kabbalah and with the much of the witchcraft systems, and it appears in a lot of different places. And so you've got this documentation about this demon that appears up here, and so you have a whole demonic structure and symbolism around that area, and you see that both Nepal and Tibet, on either side of Mount Everest, are very involved in this demonic realm. And out of that, you see that the Tibetan Buddhists develop a ritual system that is centered around only 3,000 principalities. Now, Hinduism and Indian Buddhism looks at 3 million principalities, or 3 million deities, I should say. The Tibetans are looking at, I believe, the high-level commanders of the demonic realm. And they have built a relationship, the symbiotic relationship with those highest levels of the demonic realm. And now through this Peace Vase project and through this Mandala project and these Kalachakra initiations, they're going around through the world to bring defilement through to the world, to invoke the demonic realms or principalities into various regions and locations for the purpose of gaining spiritual authority. In this particular area, this mandala was begun on October 5th, and I have a personal tale about that, because knowing that that ground was going to be consecrated to this mandala, October 5th this year. So I was intending to go with a small team at 5 a.m. in the morning, and we were going to circle the museum complex with salt to bring healing to the land and to bind the spirits into that territory.
Just for a moment, since you brought up, can you give a little bit of your revelation about salt?
Well, it was interesting. I was looking up. Salt was used by Abimelech to bring healing to the land of the city that he destroyed. God instructed him when he destroyed the city of Shechem that he was to spread salt on the land. And this salt was spread there for healing, and it was also for a covenant of sealing. Now, the thing I realized as I began studying the issue of salt is that God says every offering to him shall be accompanied with an offering of salt.
We thought it was to taste good.
So we should be bringing salt shakers in when we do our offering, I guess. I don't know. Salty money. Well, it's salty because we have salt on our hands, so I guess our handling of it is giving salt. And we're the salt of the earth. Right, we're the salt of the earth, and by the sweat of our brow, the salt is on our money and everything else. So yeah, we're giving salt with all of our offerings. But also, he talks to David and talks about a covenant of salt. So salt is very important to God. It has to do with purifying, with cleansing, with healing. Salt is a very basic substance, and there are cities and places in the world where there is no natural form of salt, and it has to be imported into that area, and it's very precious in those areas.
With the parade of chariots, didn't you guys do something?
Yeah, we.
What is the parade of chariots in Venice?
Okay, the Parade of Chariots is part of the Krishna Festival that is an annual festival here in the city of Venice, and it's done on the first Sunday of August every year, and it's been going on for 25 years, I believe. And interesting thing is that we did this ceremony on July 26th down here at the end of Ocean Park Avenue. Now, at the end of Ocean Park Avenue are 2 Asherah poles. They were put there as art objects, commissioned through the Santa Monica Arts Commission, and some artist designed these things, but they are Asherah poles. They represent the goddess of the sea. And just out from that are these 2 tables that are made up of concrete slabs in kind of strange shapes, and they've got all kinds of objects embedded or pressed into them. So there's replicas of all these objects, including guns and eyeglasses and scales from fish and all this other stuff is in here. And I call those the altars of Baal, because when we see the Asherah poles appear in Scripture, such as in the Book of Judges. It talks about destroying the Asherah poles and the altars of Baal near them. So when we came in to do this reconciliation ceremony dealing with the greed and the competition and everything established by the Tonga Indians, we brought native peoples and we brought their drums of reconciliation, and we did a ceremony right between the Asherah poles and the altars of Baal. Now that was the 26th. This year, the first Sunday in August was August 3rd. On August 2nd, we brought teams in to do worship at the Venice Pavilion up on the hillside up there, which we did. We played a very peaceful worship music over the area for 3 hours until finally somebody in the Krishna group managed to get the city officials to come and tell us we couldn't do that. But we did 3 hours of worship. One of the things we found out on that morning is that in the paper it was announced that the Krishna festival, or the Krishna parade of chariots, which are these huge ox carts with 4-story high silk temples on them, that parade normally goes from the Santa Monica Pier down the boardwalk into Venice. This year, the city passed an ordinance and they could not take the ox carts down the boardwalk through Santa Monica. They had to take them down Main Street. Is that Main Street? Yeah, Main Street down there from the Santa Monica Civic Auditorium down there. So like 3 blocks up from the boardwalk. They could not pass by the Asherah poles that we had disempowered the week before.
So next year we're hitting Main Street, right?
Yeah. Well, now we did go down Main Street with guys holding boxes of salt out the car, and we salted all the intersections that they went across. And I really feel, you know, the other thing that happened this year is that the Krishna festival got kind of pushed off into the corner. And before, they've inhabited right in the middle of the plaza there, and they've had their big stage right in the plaza. Well, they moved them on the other side out toward the ocean in front of the Venice V. And so they had a smaller area there on the grass now this year. And we brought in worship and we brought in evangelistic teams on both days, on Saturday and Sunday this year. And also there was about 60,000 people down there on Sunday, and they were not paying a whole lot of attention to the Krishna festival. Yeah. So we know that we have the ability to affect these things in the spiritual realm. And so I and a teams of other people have been going throughout Los Angeles County for the last year, and we have been doing prophetic acts to deal with the root iniquities and the strongholds by which these Tibetan Buddhists have some authority to be able to come into the city. We did a reconciliation and a recovenanting of the land on the location where the spiritual entity appeared to the Tonga people. We also, I didn't get to what happened on October 5th. We had been intending to go out there and put the salt around the museum complex at 5 a.m. in the morning, and I was talking to Don about 1:45, and we were praying about that, and I call him back a half hour later. I had gotten undressed and ready for bed and accidentally stepped off a step sideways and fell and broke my leg. I broke the part of the hip bone, or part of the femur at the top of the femur. Now, I already have an artificial hip, and so I have a steel pin that runs in my femur, but it flapped up the bone where all the muscles are attached on top. So I called Don and I said, Don, I got a little problem here. I think I just broke my leg. So anyway, Don jumped in and he did some of the other stuff. We didn't get the salt out that day, but one of the team that was...
I'm sorry, that was the day before they started the mandala?
No, this was the day that they were going to consecrate the ground and start the mandala, October 5th. And so Don took a team down there at 2 o'clock in the afternoon while they were doing this consecration ceremony, and prayed around there and talked to people, and we got some other intelligence out of that also. But then several weeks later, when I was back on my feet and walking with a cane, I got a very strong impression from the Lord that we were to bring worship and enthrone God over that complex. And this is kind of what God has been saying to me over the last year and a half. He said, there are more spiritual battles out there than you can ever deal with in a lifetime. Simply go and find the places where other gods have been enthroned and enthrone me in those places on the praises of my people. And then I read in the Book of Numbers, there's a story in there about the Korah uprising, the Korah rebellion. The sons of Korah, who were assistants to the Levites, began to complain about their role in this whole thing, and they rebel against the Levitical role. And basically God opens up the earth and swallows all of the sons of Korah and all their families and everything else. But then the next day, the people rise up again against the authority of Moses.
You've been watching Prophet.tv. Please join us next time as we continue to bring you cutting-edge spiritual technology. If you want to have your spiritual weapons sharpened, be sure to tune in to the next episode of Prophet.tv. If you'd like more information, call 818-994-4007. 818-994-4007. You've been listening to Prophet.tv. You can join us live right now on the World Wide Web at Prophet.tv. Again, www.prophet.tv is where we sharpen your spiritual weapons using the latest in spiritual technology. This is Seamus from Dublin, and you've been listening to Prophet.tv. Please join us next time as we continue to bring you the latest in cutting-edge spiritual technology.